Hello, and welcome to another edition of Veterans Corner. I'm Marshal Preston, U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel retired, and your host for today's segment. Veterans Corner is an initiative of your Westborough Veterans Advisory Board and graciously produced by our partners here at Westborough Television. The goal of Veterans Corner is to share pertinent information on topical issues that may affect our veterans, families, residents, and friends within our community. It's also an opportunity to spotlight local veterans. We seek to share some of their experiences and stories to highlight their service and continued civic contributions to the community at large. By doing so, we hope to educate the community of the variety and breadth of experiences that veterans have, and perhaps break down some of the assumptions, biases, or stereotypes that we may hold onto consciously or unconsciously. To that end, we're quite fortunate to have Michael Barretti Sr. with us today, and I'm looking forward to the conversation ahead. Mike is our Grand Marshal for Westborough's 2023 Veterans Day celebration. He is a longtime Westborough resident and a retired Marine Corps Major. Congratulations and welcome, Mike.
Thank you. My
pleasure to have you.
My pleasure as well.
So, if I may, ask you for sort of a quick background of who is Mike and where did Mike grow up and born, and how did he come about?
Well, born and raised in the Bronx, and I'll get this out of the way right now, lifelong Yankee fan.
Okay.
So just forgive me, folks, but that's what it is. Graduated from St. John's University and was commissioned right into the Marine Corps, and did almost 5 years on active duty, and then went to work for Polaroid Corporation, and that's how I eventually made my way to Massachusetts with my family.
Okay.
They told me we were only going to be up here for a year, and as I like to tell people, it's been a very long year. So, and you know, I spent the better part of my Marine Corps career in the reserves. Served in California with the 23rd Marines, in New York with the 6th Communication Battalion, as I recall, and most of the time was spent right here in Massachusetts with the 25th Marine Regiment.
Okay.
I was on the regimental staff for many, many years. They used to be in Worcester. They're now in Devens, I believe.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay. Well, let me actually go back to sort
Yeah.
of the beginning and your commissioning path.
Yeah.
I'll first ask about, back then I think it was still draft.
Yes.
So was that your entry?
No. Lifelong dream from when I can remember to be a Marine.
Okay.
And
so was there family connections in history?
Well, yes and no. We had some cousins who served. First of all, I was born in 1945, so okay. My early childhood, there was a lot of exposure to World War II. The schools were very heavy into civic pride and loyalty, and just being a good American.
Proud American. Yeah.
Proud American, yeah. And so when I had the I had a feeling at some point that I was going to serve. Mm-hmm. And halfway through my my college years, I came across a program called the Platoon Leaders Class, which is a pre-commissioning program that the Marine Corps set up to create a good foundation, a good pool of potential officers.
Right.
And I served I was at Quantico for 10 weeks in the summer between my junior and senior years. We started with 54 candidates. We graduated 28.
Okay.
It was an interesting experience. Let me just say that TV and the movies do not portray drill instructors, particularly drill instructors who are working with potential officers, as truthful, I think, or as realistic is a better word, as it really is. Finished the platoon leaders class, went back to the university for a year, and graduation day stood there on the stage in my white uniform along with 6 or 7 others, and was commissioned.
And it was St. John's, right?
St. John's in New York.
Was there an ROTC unit on
No,
St.
there
John's?
was no ROTC
Okay.
unit. And got 30 days leave, and next thing I knew, I was back down at Quantico for Officers Basic School,
Okay.
and that was 5.5 months. And, you know, we were taught how to do the things we had to know how to do.
Okay. And going back to graduation and commissioning, this is still early, in the early days of Vietnam War, so we
Yes.
hadn't really gotten into the full pushback yet.
No.
So was the campus and your parents and family, proud and supportive of service?
Yes.
Good.
Particularly my family, but the camp, I don't recall our campus ever having any issues, any real issues. It wasn't until later when I had the opportunity to return to campus as an officer after service in Vietnam that we felt the impact.
Okay.
That was 69, 70.
Okay.
So.
All right, so you graduate, you commission, you got 30 days off, and
Right.
then heading off to that
Yeah.
initial school, and every Marine's a rifleman, but every Marine also has a specialty, and yours was?
So when we got close to termination of the basic school, we received orders, and I got orders to logistics school.
Okay.
And so went home for another 30 days, got married, which was long planned. Yes, the Marine Corps did get involved in that wedding. And then off to North Carolina for 3 months. And then I had orders for Vietnam and went back home, had a couple of weeks at home, and then jumped on an airplane and left.
And how long was that first tour?
My first tour was 11 months, and it was my only tour.
Okay.
When the irony is, when I was traveling across country, I was flying on individual orders, which was pretty standard in those days for Marine officers. So got to California to Norton Air Force Base to pick up my military flight, and they said, "Gee, Lieutenant, sorry, we don't have you on the manifest." And I said, "Well, here are my orders, you know."
Yep.
So they arranged a flight, got on a plane, landed in Hawaii, and it was the same story when I went to catch the next flight. "Sorry, Lieutenant, we don't have you on the manifest."
Oh.
I said, "Okay, that's great, wonderful. Now what?" Well, hung around for a few hours, got a flight, landed in Okinawa, checked in at the Marine Corps base, and they said, "Lieutenant, we don't have anything on you."
I guess it's better than them saying you're late.
Well, that's true, absolutely. So this grizzled old gunnery sergeant, who was probably 32 or 33 years old, but to me, you know,
Yep.
he said, "Lieutenant, just go over the BOQ and, you know, take care of what you got to get taken care of, get your shots, pick up your initial set of utility uniforms, and come back in 3 or 4 days." And I ran into a few friends from basic school, and so we spent a few hours at the officers' club every day, and you know,
Okay.
the usual stuff. Got back to the transport area, and they said, "Oh yeah, Lieutenant, you're not supposed to be here." And I said, "Come on, what are you talking about?"
Yeah.
And well, I won't tell you what I really said, but he said, "No, Lieutenant, your orders were changed. You're supposed to be in the Mediterranean on a float." So the Marine Corps runs expeditionary units on a regular basis. I was supposed to be with one of those. And I said, "Well, what are you going to do, send me back?" He said, "Oh, no, sorry, Lieutenant. They said, since you're here, keep going." So, of course, day later, catch a flight, show up at Da Nang Air Base, and get in the cattle cars. And this was the one thing that unnerved me. As you left Da Nang Air Base at that time, you passed by the U.S. Army mortuary, and outside the mortuary stacks of coffins.
Yeah.
And that's
Harsh
when
reminder.
it starts to, yes, then you really understand you are not immortal, and you're in a different place.
Yep.
Checked in with division headquarters. Division said, "Yeah, Lieutenant, we have no place for you, so go get you know, a room in the BOQ. What served as the BOQ was a hut.
Yep.
Come back tomorrow and we'll see what we can do. I did, and they said, yep, you're going to 3rd 155 gun battery,
Okay.
and it's located here and here. A Jeep will pick you up. No problem, and they did. I checked in, and they said, yeah, we don't need you right now. So how are your map reading skills? I said, well, I just got out of basic school. I should be pretty good.
About
So
as
they
good as they're going to get.
Yeah, they assigned me as battery security officer. I was responsible for defensive positions and platoon commander for the security platoon, and then eventually worked my way back into the logistic needs of the unit. And so I served, you know, primarily as a logistician and secondarily as the battery security officer. It was interesting.
It sounds like it.
Well, it was the irony of this whole story, not to belabor it, is that a few months before I was supposed to rotate back, I got a new set of orders, and the assignment was a Marine Corps float in the Mediterranean. And I said, no, we're not doing that, boys. Right. By then, and I said, I have been going to be gone for a long time. I have a family. I have a new daughter who was born while I was in Vietnam, and my daughter, Dina. Yep. I didn't get to see her till she was 3 months old. So, and I kind of made a deal with the Marine Corps, and they said, well, if you'll stay on active duty for at least another year, we'll give you any assignment you want. I said, perfect, New York City.
Wow.
And lo and behold, that's where I ended up being assigned, the 1st Marine Corps district on Long Island, right outside the city.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it was very fortunate, but you know, back then, this is what they were doing.
Yeah.
I'm not sure we'd get away with that now, but that's what we were doing.
And is your wife's family from the...
We were born and raised together. We literally lived on the same street. We were 50 or 60 yards
Okay.
apart.
So
You know.
fairly significant homecoming.
Childhood sweetheart. Started dating seriously when we were 15,
Okay.
and got married. I think I just turned 23, so
True
there
love.
you go. Yeah,
That's
I guess.
fantastic.
That's what it is.
Okay. And you have another child. When did Mike Jr.?
Mike Jr. was born in 1972, just before we moved to Massachusetts. And both my children are products of the Westborough school system. I'm very proud of that. It's still an outstanding school system. He, had a childhood like every other childhood. Ups and downs, everybody has that. I'm very proud of him as I am of my daughter. Mike, at some point, decided he wanted to go to medical school, and he applied, was accepted, and we had a conversation about how it was going to get paid for. And he said, well, I have that problem solved, Dad. He said, the Navy is paying for it. And I knew exactly what he meant. Mm-hmm. And he went to medical school, and he owed the Navy 4 or 5 years after he graduated. And I said to him, just before he graduated, I said, be careful where you're assigned, because my suspicion is you're going to end up with a Marine unit. This was 2006,
Okay.
so right in the middle of the Iraq
The surge.
situation.
Yep.
Yeah, and he said, yeah, no, Dad, no problem. And 2 weeks later, he calls. He said, hey, I got my first assignment. He's headed to Camp Lejeune. So he did serve with the 22nd MU, Marine Expeditionary Unit, and spent a tour in Iraq with the 2nd Marines. Like I said, very proud of him. Mike finished with the Navy many years later. He stayed in the reserves, and he retired. Sorry, did not retire. He finished as a full commander. So he outranked me.
Proud moment.
Okay, yeah. And and my daughter, of course, was following her path,
Mm-hmm.
and she is a teacher up in Maine. She teaches English literature in Cumberland, Maine. Very proud of her. She's followed the path that she was most happy with.
That's fantastic.
She's got 3 wonderful kids, as does my son. So
Fantastic.
there we go.
Okay. Well, take me back to sort of the reserve service and the transition, the decision and the transition to go from active to reserves, and perhaps the change of pace or expectations.
I think when I came back, when I finished my active duty, Polaroid said we're going to move you to, and I joined Polaroid. Polaroid said we're going to move you to California. And so when I got out there, I ran into some folks that I had known from basic school. And after a very short conversation, I decided I was going to stay in the reserves for at least a couple more years.
Yep.
And was involved with the 23rd Marines, which was an infantry regiment, and spent a year with them before Polaroid said, you're going back to the East Coast, and got back to New Jersey and decided to join the reserves again, and the 6th Communication Battalion had an opening, and I hooked up with them, spent 18 months with them, and then moved up here to Massachusetts. I didn't have, because Polaroid said, listen, you're going to come back in a year, I didn't have an inclination to get involved with a reserve unit. So I stepped into the voluntary training unit, which didn't have a once a month requirement or 2-week in the summer requirement. But I stayed active. I went to school. And after Polaroid said, well, we'd like to keep you up there for a while, I said, okay, and connected with 25th Marines. And served on that staff for many, many years.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I've done anything more than a lot of folks have done. Everybody kind of follows a path, and I think everybody probably had similar experiences to mine.
Now, at least in the Air Force, first my entire career was active.
Yeah.
And while I've worked with lots
Lucky
of
you.
reserves and Guard, my sense of both the Guard and the reserves is it takes a bit more individual activation from managing the career and managing the assignments and finding the units that you're going to go join.
Yeah.
So it sounds like that was
It's a similar experience, absolutely. It was up to us to find an opening.
right.
And at that
Sometimes one up, one down,
Yeah.
or lateral move, or
and-
sometimes even a change in potential career specialties.
Exactly. I think balancing the active reserve at that time had a lot of, there was a great interest in making sure that active reserve was up to snuff in terms of training, so that they could easily integrate into the active Marine Corps if it was required. And the 25th Regiment was responsible if the so-called balloon went up. At that time, our greatest adversary that we were concerned about was the Russians, and that was in Europe. And the responsibility for the 25th Marines was to operate in Northern Europe. So we became the so-called cold weather regiment in the Marine Corps. Okay. And I'm sure there was an active duty counterpart to it, but so we would do cold weather training. I mean, I've been in the middle of Minnesota in the winter, and it's no fun.
No.
Living in a snow hut and doing that kind of stuff.
Ice fishing.
Yeah, no, unfortunately not. You learn little things like when it's that cold, you be careful you don't get gasoline on your hands when you're, putting gasoline in your car, right?
Right.
We really focused on the European theater. There were a couple of summers where we did a lot of NATO exercises. NATO at that time had a Operation Reforager, and it was an ongoing exercise. It just never really stopped. It just kept going. And
Okay.
we had the opportunity to do some work with them. And at one
So did you
point,
get to travel back over to Europe in
Yes.
some of those capacities?
yeah. At one point, I was an umpire on one of the exercises, which was interesting.
Yeah.
you know, one of the experiences I remember from that was you had the good guys and the opposing forces, and we were on a beach, and the Germans were the German units that we were working with were the opposing forces. And they came at us with tanks. And if you ever been on I've never been on the receiving end of a tank coming at me. And, you know, and of course all the guys are in foxholes, right? Dug in, defensive perimeter. And I mean, everybody was, you know, everything was under control. But as the umpire, I had to say, everybody stand up so they could see you. Right. You know, it was kind of, you know, you think about if you go back to these World War II times, or even the first Gulf War. Yeah. Well, yeah, to have a, you know, a multi-ton vehicle coming at you with the intent of doing you harm, you know, was a little disconcerting.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's big, it's faster than it looks, and it's a heck of a lot more mobile than, than your average
absolutely
vehicle.
Yeah.
And it's prickled with you know armaments and folks inside of it that are well skilled at their trade too.
Yes. The biggest issue with the reserve component, of course, as you alluded to, is, you know, having to make sure that you balance the reserve requirement with, you know, your own daily personal requirements and your job. Mm-hmm. You know, working from home back in the 70s and 80s. So
was that a challenge? Did you have a good relationship with your employer to support this?
Yes.
Was that unusual at the time, or was that?
No, I don't think it was unusual. As a matter of fact, it's the military actually was one of the reasons why I got hired by Polaroid. I was still on active duty when I was interviewing, and they said, "Can you come up to Boston and meet with some guys in our distribution division?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And so I had to make a trip up to do an inspection of one of the recruiting centers up here in Boston. So I combined it. Of course, I was in uniform, and I walked into the general manager's office, a guy named Mike Retsky. I'll never forget this guy. Little did I know, he was a retired Army colonel. And I walked in uniform, and he said, "Welcome," the usual, had a seat. And he said, "Okay, when do you want to start, Captain?" And I said, "I'm hired?" He said, "Yes, absolutely." And we got to know each other, you know, over the couple of years. And he said, "Nobody ever walked into my office in a uniform for a job." He said, "I knew it when you showed up."
That's, that you're right. That story doesn't happen very often.
No,
so.
no.
And I think later in your reading your biography, it sounds like you paid that forward with some of the organizations that you helped in some of the relationships, UMass Lowell and even Suffolk for connecting veterans. And
in 1997, I kind of stepped out of the business career for the most part and I joined the faculty at Suffolk University. And there was always an affinity for veterans at the university, but of course, as things progressed into the early 2000s with 9/11 and Afghanistan and Iraq, that highlighted the veteran student, or the student veteran, I should say. And we decided that we needed to do something a little more forceful. We made a very deliberate decision to recruit veterans. I was working with a couple of Marine Corps folks down in Arlington at the time to see what we could do about that. Several of the universities in Boston had established satellite learning centers on military bases. We explored that. But at home, we decided, and Bill O'Neill, who is a Polaroid veteran who I never knew, actually didn't find out until later. He was president of the Consumer Products Division for a while. Bill O'Neill was the dean of the business school at the time and immediately got behind it, and we set up a Veterans Commission. I had the privilege of of co-chairing that commission with one of the other deans, and we made it a veteran-friendly environment. And I'm actually next week I'm going to be attending the annual Veterans Luncheon at Suffolk.
That's fantastic.
And it's alive and well, and the program is going as we had hoped it would.
No, as a recent experience on the MIT and
Yep.
Harvard campuses, the student veteran populations, I think, are well organized and fairly well supported, and as now a formal veteran myself, partaking in paying that forward is something
I think it's important. Look. First of all, the government, in their sometimes infinite wisdom, they've really put a lot behind supporting veterans and veteran education, and I think that it's really when I was coming off active duty, when I was working with Polaroid, I used the GI Bill to get my master's degree, and there's no that was it. You had the GI Bill, you had your normal veterans benefits.
Right.
But the way they've constructed the educational component of the GI benefits now is fantastic.
Yeah, I to their credit, I think they've done a fantastic job of supporting veterans,
Yes.
but also building ramps to support the spouses and dependents of the veterans, recognizing all the sacrifices that come with
Yes.
the service of
Yes.
of the families.
And I think that's absolutely critical. I honestly don't know how my wife put up with me disappearing for 2 weeks in the summer. And honestly, with the Marine Corps, it wasn't just the 2 weeks active duty in the summer. There was an expectation that you would attend a school as well during the year.
Right.
So that was another 2 weeks, and then there was every weekend, or
Yeah,
every month you had a weekend of obligation, and so I think, and I look back at right now what wives of active duty, or shouldn't say wives, families of active duty personnel have gone through over the last 15 years. I mean, when you think of and you probably experienced this, you've got these rotations, you're deployed, and then you're back for 7 or 8 months, and half of that time you're training to get ready for the next deployment, and then you're deployed again.
Yep.
The pressure on families was enormous. I mean, I've read some of those reports,
Yep.
and they were pretty, it doesn't paint a great picture, and I'm so happy that situation has straightened itself out now, I think. It's still difficult, but it's not as bad as it used to be.
Agreed. No, I've certainly got some personal experiences
Yeah.
and can share them. But sadly, I think we're approaching some of our time.
Yeah.
So before we
Yeah.
close, I wanted to give you an opportunity to sort of give anyone out there, what are some life lessons that you took away from your service, and then what are some any myths or stereotypes that you'd like to break down and inform that we're not that different, or
Well, look, you take away individual lessons. So, I mean, the Marine Corps is, as is any military, but I think particularly the Marine Corps is a character-building organization. We have an ethos that is, I think, and I know there are a lot of my fellow Marines out there who believe it, second to none. And the attitude about once a Marine, always Marine is absolutely true. You take away individual things. You take away the sense of course, commitment. You take away the sense of courage. You take away the sense of honor. Mm-hmm. You take away the fact that there is something greater that you are devoted to. There was a line from Full Metal Jacket, and the drill instructor said, essentially, I'm going to paraphrase, even if you die, you will always live because the Marine Corps will live forever. And, yes, Hollywood written, but at the same time, there's a little truth to it.
Well, I think it's almost a great segue into the Veterans Day. It's
Yes.
this nod to that service which
Yeah.
is more than an individual.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. I mean, look, I have a definition of a veteran, and I may mention this on Saturday. We talk about veterans being heroes, veterans being, selfless, and that's absolutely true. And as we talked earlier, it's not just military. I mean, we have a lot of selfless people in Westborough.
Yes.
Police, the fire, guys on DPW, teachers. I'm just pulling up,
Yep.
But here's my definition of a veteran. I read it someplace, so it's not original. A veteran is a person who writes a check to the U.S. government to be cashed at a time and place unknown and payable in any amount up to and including their lives.
Yep. It's as simple and as serious as that.
Yes, that's exactly. I think that encompasses the simplicity, you're right, and the seriousness of what a person who is in the military or any other frontline, first line responder, first responder is doing.
Yeah. Well, don't give it all away. We're excited to have you as our Grand Marshal.
I hope I wasn't too boring for you. And
Not at all. I could continue, and perhaps we'll schedule a second one for it.
Oh.
Thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure.
Let me turn to our greater audience out there. So as we wrap up today's session, the Westborough Veterans Advisory Board extends an invite to all residents of the town to join us on Saturday, November 11th at 10:30 a.m. for a celebration of all veterans and their selfless contributions they made and continue to make to our vibrant country. The program will begin at 10:30 a.m. in front of the Forbes Municipal Building with a schedule of activities including invocation, patriotic choral presentations, and comments from invited guests and our 2023 Grand Marshal, Michael Barretti, who kindly joined us today. The program will conclude with the traditional recognition of the 11th month, 11th day, 11th hour significance for which Veterans Day was created. The event is being planned to celebrate and thank all veterans for their service to the country and to highlight the support and high level of respect its citizens have for them. As a reminder to our audience, our Veteran Service Officer, Jeff Farrell, maintains an office in the first floor of the Town Hall and whose contact information can be seen on screen at the end of today's show. Both he and the Veterans Advisory Board are here to help guide you to the resources and benefits that your uniformed service may have earned. And finally, I'd like to thank our partners Westborough Television for their continued support in putting this Veterans Corner together. And of course, a big thank you to today's guest, Michael Barretti, for sharing his story. Until next time, thank you for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful week. Thanks again, Mike.
Thank you.